So I just wanted to go on record, re the university's recent letter concerning safe spaces. It's never seemed to me that anyone ever wants to stop anyone from feeling safe. So in some ways, this letter is indulging in something of a red herring. Students automatically have safe spaces by dint of being private individuals with the freedom of association on campus in a country with a Bill of Rights. What I mean by that is that if a student feels unsafe, they have all the freedom in the world and all the support in the world they need to form a club, have a private meeting, be with their friends or other like-minded people in their dorms. There's nothing preventing people who feel threatened from retreating from certain aspects of campus life, generally speaking. Now, given that this is true, somewhat indisputably, and we can get to trigger warnings for classes in a second, but I just mean things like people feeling threatened by Christina Hoff Sommers' talk, or a talk critical of the idea of rape culture, or a talk discussing the very real problems that the black family currently has and the contributions that those problems make to criminality. These people, they don't want to be safe. They want to feel safe and have the right to feel safe no matter where they are, including at my private meeting. It's tremendously funny to have or to see these advocates of safe spaces going out of their way to come into spaces where they feel unsafe. So this idea that the university should be providing safe spaces is something of a canard, because that's not the issue. The university does, has, and will continue to provide lots of safe space for people of any persuasion. What universities will not do is allow students to feel safe, that is, to be in a safe space wherever they are. It won't allow them to carry their safe space with them through the world as they go about their daily lives. That's absolutely necessary, because conflict, often unpleasant conflict, and the discussion of things that is unpleasant is a part of the kind of mandate of the university. If you're going to investigate a world that is occasionally ugly, excuse me, it's necessary that you view ugly things. Granted, some people can't handle the view of that ugliness. I suspect the people who are actually traumatized, or the numbers of people who are actually traumatized, is quite a bit smaller than we're being told. Nonetheless, if there are people that can't handle a frank discussion or even a mention of something like rape, these people don't need to be at a university. They are ill-equipped in the same way that someone who lacks legs is ill-equipped to play soccer. It's not anything against them. It's just to say that the university is not a place for them. It's not a place where they can be safe. And if the university is to fulfill its necessary functions, at least in my conception of a university, then we can't allow safe space culture to invade. Now, the problems that SJW types have with certain talks is distinct, I think, from the issue of trigger warnings in class descriptions, say. It seems very, very clear to me that the people who are interested in using safe spaces, microaggressions, the idea of inherent threats to shut down debate, their position, re-safe spaces, is kind of obviously self-serving and absurd. You can't clamor for a safe space and at the same time invade someone else's space and tell them to shut up. Of course you can, and people do, but they're inconsistent and only tolerated because they're a member of an aggrieved or minority group, which is itself a condescending problem. I mean, look at my skin. It bothers me that anyone would take my speech on anything more seriously because I'm browner than they are. Nonetheless, trying to shut down private functions because they make you uncomfortable, I think, is obviously an abuse of the idea of the safe space or the trigger warning. When we come to individual classes, things change a little bit, I think. Now, I don't necessarily have a problem with trigger warnings, except insofar as they engender a kind of slippery slope towards more and more extreme SJW culture. I don't have a problem with them on class materials or readings, provided that it's possible for a department to define a course of study such that someone who is unable to view difficult material cannot, in principle, and in fact, complete that course of study. For example, if someone wants to be a classics major, someone wants to be a classicist, and they refuse to learn about war because they would be triggered by it, well, this is unfortunate, but it also precludes them from reasonably being a classicist. If someone has not read the Iliad, they are a bad classics person. I would argue that if someone hasn't read Ovid, they're a bad classics person. Especially in a subject like the humanities, needing to exempt yourself from scrutiny of some of the more unpleasant and challenging but tremendously important aspects of human life, suffering, pain, rape, war. Not being able to comprehend these without going through a mental breakdown should preclude someone from completing a degree in a humanistic subject. As long as that's possible, and hopefully done in practice, then I have no problem in principle with trigger warnings. For example, it may be possible to conceive of an art history program where one never had to view or understand any material that referenced rape or sexual violence. I think that's true. I'm not entirely sure, just because I don't know how big, visual depictions of rape and sexual violence are in the art history world. Certainly, I think that you would probably be precluded from studying classical art history if you were never able to expose yourself to scenes of violence or rape. But I'm sure there are classics people who would agree with me, or who would disagree with me. My only point is that as long as universities are allowed to set standards, and as long as we are not mandated by some external force to accommodate fragile minds in contravention of those standards, then trigger warnings are fine. I think, though, that they do lead to a slippery... not all slippery slope arguments are fallacious. I do think that when you start with trigger warnings in the classroom, eventually you will, at least in some places, end up with departments which no longer have the will or ability to make their graduate students or undergraduates or even legal students. We saw recently that someone objected to learning about rape in law school, and this is madness, right? To not learn about rape in law school and still want to become a lawyer, that shouldn't be possible. That's a bad lawyer. It's an incompletely educated lawyer that you'll create if you are never allowed to go through case law on sexual assault because someone might be triggered. So I don't necessarily have a problem with the mentally fragile being at a university. I do have a problem with their attending a university when their presence substantially degrades the quality and content of the discourse at that university. Yeah. So I think it's important to read the Chicago letter carefully. It says that we don't support safe spaces. I'm going to pull it up just to be sure. It says that we don't support trigger warnings or safe spaces, but it doesn't say that it disallows them. That's a huge issue. I don't support even the mentally fragile. I don't support their ability to hide themselves away from the problems that they need to overcome. And I think a large part of the psychological community is on my side with respect to this as well. But I'm not going to take away the right that someone has to form a private association where they can feel safe and discuss whatever they want with people of a like mind. And the Chicago letter doesn't purport to do that. It simply says it doesn't support such behavior. It never said it wouldn't allow it. So I think that's important. My parents didn't support me shaving my head, but they didn't disallow it either. And they've accommodated themselves to it. So really, this is I think quite a weak letter in a lot of ways. Even if it does kind of act as a lightning rod for the community right now. I think that's all I have to say. So in conclusion, using arguments about safe spaces to shut down discussions around uncomfortable subjects, right? Using it to censor discussion critical of feminism, critical of rape culture, critical of the black community on the grounds that such discussion is somehow discriminatory or racist or threatening. That is a clear authoritarian move designed to shut down speech without argument. I mean, this is not complicated. Feminism, Black Lives Matter, the black community, rape culture, privilege, these are all concepts that are valid targets for critical scrutiny. And if you don't believe that, then you're an authoritarian asshole. It's really pretty fucking simple on that level. On the class level, rather on the level of classes that are being taught, trigger warnings aren't inherently problematic, just as long as departments aren't forced to change their educational standards and make every course devoid of challenging material to accommodate the mentally fragile. Especially in the humanities, and I would imagine in the social sciences, the ability to behold the badness of humanity is a central part of the learning experience. I can't help but believe that if you water that down to accommodate people who cannot handle something because of injury, it's like limiting how fast players in the English Premier League can run to accommodate some people that have missing legs. These people are in the wrong place. And as long as departments can make that determination and exclude people because they refuse to deal with difficult issues, then in principle, I have no problem with those trigger warnings. In practice, it does seem to me to lead down a slippery slope to self-censorship and to outrage culture and to all these things that really just kind of suck the life out of the robust conflict that should be at the heart of any good university. Thank you.